When attended by a waitress, Millionaire is shocked to recognize his childhood sweetheart. She was presumed dead for 17 years. Get ready for a journey full of nostalgia and incredible twists. Today's story is truly remarkable, with an ending that's sure to touch your heart and leave you amazed. So, stay with me until the very last moment. I hope this experience is unforgettable for you, and may God bless you and your family. Now, let's get started. Maxwell Sterling adjusted his Rolex watch as he stepped into Pete's Diner on a warm June evening in 1985. The small establishment on the outskirts of Boston wasn't his usual dining choice, but his Porsche 911 had started making strange noises, and this was the only place open past midnight in this part of town. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow on the checkered floor tiles. A jukebox in the corner played REO Speedwagon's Can't Fight This Feeling. While a few truckers nursed their coffee cups at the counter, the air smelled of burnt coffee and grilled onions. Maxwell loosened his silk tie, feeling out of place in his tailored suit. At 35, he was one of Boston's most successful real estate developers, more accustomed to five-star restaurants than small-town diners. But tonight, fate had other plans. "Be right with you," a voice called from behind the counter. Maxwell slid into a worn vinyl booth, picking up a laminated menu. The prices made him smile. $2.99 for a full breakfast seemed like a relic from another era. "Ready to order." The waitress appeared at his table, pen poised over her notepad. Maxwell looked up, and the world stopped spinning. Those eyes. He knew those eyes. The pen clattered to the floor. The waitress, Sarah, according to her name tag, stood frozen, her face draining of color as if she'd seen a ghost. In a way, perhaps she had. "Emily," Maxwell whispered, his voice barely audible over the humming of the overhead lights. "Emily Morrison." The waitress took a step backward, her hands trembling. I'm sorry. You must be mistaking me for someone else." But her voice quivered with recognition. Maxwell stood up, his legs unsteady. Emily Morrison had been his first love, his next-door neighbor, the girl who had promised to marry him when they were both 14, the girl who had disappeared without a trace during a family vacation in 1968, presumed drowned in Lake Michigan, the girl whose loss had haunted him for 17 years. "It is you," he said, studying her face. Time had changed her. Gone was the teenage girl with wild auburn curls and freckles. This woman's hair was darker, straight, pulled back in a practical ponytail. Lines of worry creased the corners of her eyes. But those eyes, those remarkable green eyes with golden flecks, were unmistakable. "Please," she whispered, glancing nervously toward the kitchen. "You need to leave." "Emily, everyone thought you were dead. Your parents. They never recovered. What happened to you?" She backed away, shaking her head. "My name is Sarah Collins. You're mistaking me for someone else. Please, just order your food or leave." But Maxwell couldn't move. 17 years of grief and questions rooted him to the spot. The girl he had loved, the girl whose loss had shaped his entire life, was standing before him in a waitress uniform in a rundown diner. "Order something, sit down, and stop drawing attention," she hissed, her professional smile firmly in place, but her eyes pleading. "I get off work at 2. Meet me at the park across the street. I'll explain everything." Maxwell slowly sank back into the booth, his mind reeling. "Coffee, black," he managed to say, "and apple pie." As she hurried away, Maxwell noticed her hands were still shaking. He glanced at his watch, 12:45 a.m., just over an hour until he would finally learn the truth about what happened that summer day in 1968. But something in Emily's, Sarah's eyes told him that the truth might be more dangerous than the mystery had ever been. The next hour and 15 minutes were the longest of Maxwell Sterling's life. He sat in the vinyl booth, barely touching his coffee and pie tea, watching Emily, or Sarah as she called herself now, move between tables with practiced efficiency. Every movement, every gesture brought back memories he'd buried deep years ago. Summer afternoons spent climbing the big oak tree between their houses, Emily teaching him to ride a bike, running alongside until he found his balance. The day she gave him his first kiss, quick and innocent, behind the garden shed when they were 12. The promise they made at 14, carving their initials into that same oak tree, swearing they'd marry each other someday. Now, in the harsh fluorescent light of Pete's diner, Maxwell noticed things he'd missed in his initial shock: the slight limp in her left leg, the way she kept glancing at the kitchen door, as if expecting someone to burst through at any moment, the tired lines around her mouth that spoke of years of worry. This wasn't the carefree girl he'd known. This was a woman carrying a heavy burden. His mind wandered back to that terrible summer of '68, the Morrison family's annual vacation to Lake Michigan. The frantic phone call from Emily's mother to his parents. Emily had gone for a swim and never returned. Days of searching yielded nothing but her beach towel on the shore, the funeral with an empty casket, the way her parents sold their house and moved away 6 months later, unable to live next door to the constant reminders of their loss. Maxwell pulled out his wallet, removing a worn photograph he'd carried for 17 years. It showed him and Emily at his 14th birthday party, both grinning at the camera, his arm around her shoulders. She wore a yellow sundress dotted with daisies, her auburn curls wild in the summer breeze. He'd been gangly then, all knees and elbows, wearing a Beatles t-shirt and sporting a terrible attempt at growing his first mustache. "More coffee?" Her voice startled him from his reverie. Emily, Sarah, stood by his table, coffee pot in hand, deliberately not looking at the photograph. "Please," he said, noting how her hand trembled slightly as she poured. He wanted to grab that hand, to demand answers right there, but something in her rigid posture warned him to wait. The diner slowly emptied as the night wore on. The truckers paid their bills and headed back to their rigs. The cook in the kitchen began cleaning up, the clatter of pots and pans creating a metallic symphony. Through the windows, Maxwell could see the occasional car passing by on the highway, headlights cutting through the darkness. At 1:45, a burly man in a grease-stained apron emerged from the kitchen. "Head on home, Sarah," he called out. "I'll finish closing up." "Thanks, Pete," she replied, untying her apron. "I'll see you tomorrow." Maxwell watched as she disappeared into the back room, emerging a few minutes later in jeans and a simple blue blouse, her hair now loose around her shoulders. She walked past his table without a word, heading for the door. He paid his bill, leaving a generous tip, and followed her out into the warm summer night. The park across the street was little more than a small patch of grass with a few benches and an old swing set, illuminated by a single streetlight. Emily sat on one of the benches, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Maxwell sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. For a long moment, neither spoke. An airplane droned overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. "I didn't drown," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I ran away. I had to—" Maxwell turned to look at her profile, so achingly familiar yet changed by time. "Why?" She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. "That day at the lake, I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. Something involving my father's business partners. They saw me too. One of them made it very clear that if I ever told anyone, my whole family would suffer. I was 14, scared out of my mind. Running away seemed like the only option to keep everyone safe." Maxwell's mind raced. Thomas Morrison, Emily's father, had been a successful investment banker. He'd always seemed like such a straight-laced man, coaching Little League and serving on the church board. "What did you see?" Emily shook her head. "Even now, it's not safe to talk about it. Those men, they're still out there, still powerful. I've spent 17 years looking over my shoulder, moving from town to town, never staying in one place too long. Sarah Collins is just the latest in a long line of names I've used. But your parents, Emily, the grief destroyed them. Your mother had a nervous breakdown. Your father died of a heart attack 5 years ago." She turned to him then, tears streaming down her face. "Don't you think I know that? Don't you think it killed me to stay away? But I was convinced that showing up alive would put them in danger. At least if they thought I was dead, they were safe." Maxwell wanted to reach out, to wipe away her tears, but he kept his hands firmly at his sides. "And now, are you still in danger?" "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe after all these years, they've forgotten about me. or maybe they're still watching. All I know is that for the first time in 17 years, I've stayed in one place for more than 6 months. I like it here. Pete's a good boss, doesn't ask too many questions. I have a small apartment, a few friends. It's not much of a life, but it's mine. Let me help you, Maxwell said. I have resources now, connections. We can go to the authorities, get protection. No! The force of her response startled him. You don't understand. These men, they have people everywhere. Police, government, judiciary. I learned that the hard way in 1975 when I tried to contact my parents. Within days, there was a break-in at my apartment in Minnesota. Nothing was taken, but my few photographs were arranged on my bed. A warning. I ran again that night. Maxwell felt a cold anger building inside him. The thought of Emily spending all these years alone, afraid, running from shadows while he built his real estate empire, it seemed profoundly unjust. At least tell me what happened to you all these years, he said softly. Where did you go? How did you survive? She gave him a sad smile. That's a very long story, Max, and knowing it would only put you in danger too. I'm not that scared 14-year-old boy anymore, Em. I can handle danger. But I'm not asking you to handle it, she replied, standing up. I'm asking you to forget you ever saw me. Go back to your life, Max. You've done well for yourself. I see your name in the business pages sometimes. Don't risk everything for a ghost from the past. As she turned to leave, Maxwell called out, The oak tree's still there. New owners of your old house wanted to cut it down 10 years ago. I bought the property just to save it. Our initials are still carved in the bark. She paused but didn't turn around. Goodbye, Max. Please, just let me go. Again. He watched her walk away, disappearing into the shadows beyond the streetlight, but this time he had no intention of letting her vanish from his life. Not again, not without a fight. Looking at his watch, 2:45 a.m., Maxwell Sterling made a decision. By morning, he would have his best private investigators looking into Thomas Morrison's old business dealings. Somewhere in those 17-year-old records lay the key to Emily's freedom, and this time he had the resources to uncover it. What he didn't know was that his coffee cup at the diner hadn't been the only thing watching him that night. Across the street, in a dark sedan with tinted windows, a man spoke quietly into a car phone. It's happened. She's been recognized. Yes, by Maxwell Sterling. No, she didn't seem to tell him anything specific. Yes, I understand. I'll keep watching. The sedan's engine purred to life, following the distant figure of Emily Morrison as she walked home through the quiet streets of a city that had no idea the past was about to catch up with its present. Maxwell Sterling sat in his office on the 32nd floor of the Sterling Tower, staring at the stack of files his private investigator had delivered that morning. 3 days had passed since his encounter with Emily at Pete's diner. 3 days of sleepless nights and constant worry. The diner had been closed when he returned the next evening, a handwritten sign on the door announcing "Family Emergency" as the reason. The morning sun glinted off his IBM Selectric typewriter and the stack of Wall Street journals piled neatly on the corner of his mahogany desk. His secretary's voice crackled through the intercom. "Mr. Sterling, your 10 o'clock appointment is here." "Send him in, Margaret." Frank Whitaker entered the office, a weathered man in his 60s wearing a rumpled brown suit that had seen better days. He'd been Boston's best private investigator for 3 decades, and Maxwell was paying him triple his usual rate for this case. "What did you find?" Maxwell asked, gesturing for Frank to sit. "It's complicated," Frank said, pulling out a notebook. Thomas Morrison wasn't just any investment banker. In the late 60s, he was handling accounts for some of the biggest names in the East Coast shipping industry. But here's where it gets interesting. Several of those companies were suspected fronts for something bigger. Bigger how? Ever heard of Vincent Calabrese? Maxwell's stomach tightened. Everyone in Boston knew that name. The shipping magnate? That's his public face. Behind the scenes, well, let's just say his ships carried more than just legal cargo. Morrison was handling his money, along with funds for several other businessmen of similar reputation. Maxwell leaned back in his leather chair, processing this information. "And you think Emily, his daughter, saw something involving these men?" Frank nodded. In '68, there was a federal investigation into money laundering through Morrison's bank. It went nowhere. Witnesses disappeared, evidence vanished. Then Morrison's daughter supposedly drowns, and within 6 months, he's transferred to a different branch, moved away, and all the suspicious accounts were cleared of wrongdoing. Could these people still be watching her after all these years? Men like Calabrese don't forget, and they don't forgive. Frank pulled out a photograph. This was taken outside Pete's diner 2 nights ago. Maxwell studied the grainy image. A dark sedan with 2 men inside, parked across the street. The car belongs to Marcus D'Angelo, one of Calabrese's top lieutenants. Frank's voice was grim. They know she's been found, Mr. Sterling, and they're not happy about it. Maxwell's intercom buzzed again. Mr. Sterling, there's a Pete Sullivan here to see you. He says it's urgent. He doesn't have an appointment. Maxwell's heart jumped. Pete, the diner owner. Send him in immediately. Pete looked out of place in the elegant office, his massive frame dwarfing the visitor's chair. His face was red from exertion or worry, probably both. Mr. Sterling, he said, twisting his cap in his hands. Sarah. Or Emily, I guess that's her real name. She's gone. Left me this note. He handed over a folded piece of paper. Maxwell read it quickly. Pete, I'm sorry, but I have to leave. You've been good to me, better than I deserved. Don't try to find me, and if anyone asks, especially Max Sterling, please tell them you never saw me leave. It's safer that way. Sarah. When? Maxwell demanded. Found the note when I opened up yesterday. Her apartment's cleaned out. But Mr. Sterling... Pete leaned forward, lowering his voice. She didn't leave alone. 2 men were waiting in a car outside her place the night before. I saw them from my apartment above the diner. They went up to her place, and about an hour later, all 3 of them drove away. Frank Whitaker's face darkened. D'Angelo's men. Maxwell was already reaching for his phone. Margaret, cancel all my appointments for the next week and get me everything you can find on Vincent Calabrese's properties in the area. He turned to Frank. I need to know where they might have taken her. Mr. Sterling, Frank's voice was cautious, these aren't men you want to cross. They've made people disappear for a lot less. They made her disappear once before, Maxwell said, his voice hard. I'm not letting it happen again. After Pete and Frank left, Maxwell sat alone in his office, Emily's note in his hands. The girl who had taught him to ride a bike was now a woman mixed up in something dark and dangerous. The past he'd tried to bury had resurfaced with sharp edges and deadly stakes. Opening his desk drawer, he removed an old photograph, him and Emily at 14 under that oak tree. Flipping it over, he noticed something he'd never seen before. In the corner, in Emily's neat handwriting, "Remember the fireflies." Maxwell's mind raced back to their last night together, before the fateful lake vacation. They'd caught fireflies in jars, releasing them in Emily's backyard. She'd made him promise that if they were ever separated, they'd find their way back to each other, just like the fireflies always found their way home. He grabbed his phone again. Margaret, one more thing. Find out who owns the Morrisons' old property now, and get me the number for Pete's diner. A plan was forming in his mind. Emily had always been clever with codes and hidden messages. Don't try to find me, her note had said, but maybe she'd left him a clue about where they were taking her, knowing he'd be the only one who could decipher it. As the sun set over Boston, casting long shadows through his office windows, Maxwell Sterling began his own investigation. In his vault at home was a box of old letters, birthday cards, and notes from Emily, every message they'd ever exchanged. Somewhere in those childhood memories might be the key to finding her. What he didn't know was that at that very moment, in a windowless room in an abandoned warehouse by the harbor, Emily Morrison was also thinking about those childhood codes. As she listened to the footsteps of her guards outside the door, she prayed Maxwell would remember enough of their shared past to understand her message. Because she had exactly 3 days before Vincent Calabrese himself would arrive to ensure that the secrets of the past stayed buried, permanently this time. The sun sank below the horizon, and somewhere in the city a solitary firefly blinked its light against the gathering darkness. In the dim light of his study, Maxwell spread dozens of yellowed papers across his desk. Old letters, notes passed in class, birthday cards, every scrap of communication he and Emily had shared before she vanished. His tie hung loose around his neck, and his normally immaculate hair was disheveled from running his fingers through it in frustration. The grandfather clock in the corner struck midnight, its deep chimes echoing through the empty house. Outside, a summer storm was brewing, lightning occasionally illuminating the study through the large windows. "Remember the fireflies," he muttered, reading Emily's handwriting on the back of the photograph again. Next to it lay her final note to Pete. "Don't try to find me." Something about the phrasing nagged at him. Emily had always loved wordplay, even as a child. She'd created elaborate codes for their secret messages, often hiding real meanings behind seemingly simple words. A flash of memory struck him. Summer of '67, a game they'd played. They'd write letters that seemed to say one thing, but held hidden meanings in certain words. "Don't look" had meant look carefully. "Never go" had meant go now. Maxwell grabbed Pete's note again, his hands trembling slightly. If she was following their old pattern, "Don't try to find me," could mean exactly the opposite. He began scanning their childhood letters with renewed purpose, looking for patterns, for any mention of places they'd considered special. One letter caught his eye, dated just weeks before she disappeared. Emily had written about a secret hideout they'd discovered, an abandoned boathouse near the lake where her family vacationed. "Remember how we said it would be our secret place?" she'd written. "If I ever needed to hide, that's where I'd go. Nobody else knows about it." Maxwell's phone rang, startling him. It was Frank Whitaker. "Got something," the investigator said without preamble. "Calabrese owns an old shipping warehouse on Pier 17. Hasn't been used for legitimate business in years, but there's been activity there recently. Cars coming and going at odd hours. How heavily guarded? At least 4 men at all times. Listen, Mr. Sterling, whatever you're thinking." "Thanks, Frank. I'll wire your payment in the morning." Maxwell hung up before the investigator could protest. He returned to the letters, his mind working furiously. The boathouse. Emily had chosen it because it was hidden behind a stand of old oak trees, just like the oak tree where they'd carved their initials. Another letter caught his eye, this one from their last summer together. They'd developed a secret code based on fireflies. 1 flash meant danger, 2 meant safety, 3 meant "come find me." Maxwell's heart raced as he reread Pete's note one more time. There were exactly 3 periods after her signature. She was telling him to come find her. But where? The warehouse seemed too obvious. If Emily was still the clever girl he'd known, she'd have left him a more specific clue. Lightning flashed again, and thunder rolled across the city. Maxwell walked to his window, watching the storm approach. Below, the streets of Boston glistened with the first drops of rain. His eyes drifted to the oak tree in his yard, the one he'd saved from being cut down. In the darkness, something caught his eye. A brief flash of light near its base, then another, and a third. Maxwell ran downstairs and out into the rain. There, at the base of the oak tree, was a small jar with 3 fireflies inside. Taped to it was a scrap of paper, already getting wet in the rain. 3 days, Warehouse 17. Trust the pattern. The handwriting was Emily's. Racing back inside, Maxwell began putting the pieces together. The warehouse number, 17, matched the pier Frank had mentioned. But trust the pattern. What pattern? He spread the letters out again, this time looking at dates. The boathouse letter had been written on the 17th of July. The Firefly Code had been created on August 17th, and today was September 14th. 3 days would make it September 17th. Emily wasn't just telling him where she was telling him when to come, when the guards might be expecting a meeting with Calabrese, not a rescue attempt. Maxwell walked to his safe and removed a small key. Behind his modern banking building downtown was an older structure, owned through a holding company. Inside was everything he might need, including items from his brief stint in Army intelligence before joining his father's real estate business. He had 3 days to plan, to remember everything he'd learned about covert operations, and to figure out exactly what kind of operation Calabrese was running. 3 days to save the woman he'd never stopped loving. As he gathered what he needed, Maxwell's phone rang again. This time it was Pete. "Mr. Sterling, something strange happened at the diner tonight. A woman came in, ordered the exact same meal you had that night, coffee and apple pie. Left this for you." Pete's voice was hushed, nervous. "What did she leave?" "An old photograph of some kind of boathouse. There's writing on the back, 'Where time stops at midnight.'" Maxwell's pulse quickened. The boathouse photo could only have come from Emily, and midnight, in their old codes. That had always meant noon, the opposite time. "Pete, I need you to do something for me, something that might seem strange." As Maxwell outlined his plan, the storm raged outside. 3 days to prepare. 3 days until he would face whatever darkness had kept Emily running for 17 years. In the warehouse by the pier, Emily sat in her small room, listening to the storm. She'd managed to slip out long enough to leave her messages, knowing the guards would be distracted by the weather. Now all she could do was wait and hope. Hope that Maxwell would decode her messages correctly. Hope that he would understand why September 17th at noon was so important. Hope that he would remember enough about their shared past to know exactly how to help her expose the truth that had kept her running for so long. The truth about what really happened that day at the lake in 1968. Lightning flashed again, and somewhere in the dark warehouse, a door creaked open. Dawn broke over Boston Harbor on September 17th, 1985, the sun painting the water in shades of gold and pink. Maxwell Sterling sat in his parked Mercedes 2 blocks from Pier 17, watching dock workers begin their morning routines through binoculars. He'd been there since 4 a.m., noting every detail, every pattern. The past 3 days had been a blur of preparation and discovery. What he'd learned about Vincent Calabrese's operation had chilled him to the bone. The shipping magnate wasn't just involved in money laundering. His entire empire was built on stolen artwork, smuggled during the chaos of World War II. Thomas Morrison, Emily's father, had unknowingly stumbled onto the truth while handling their accounts. Emily must have seen something that day at the lake. Documents, paintings, or worse. Something valuable enough to keep her running for 17 years. Maxwell checked his watch, 10:45 a.m. In his trunk were the tools he'd need, rope, wire cutters, and a few other items he'd rather not think about. Pete would be making his delivery to the warehouse in exactly 45 minutes, right on schedule. The old diner owner had been surprisingly willing to help. "Sarah, Emily, she was the best employee I ever had," he'd said. "More than that, she was kind. Whatever trouble she's in, she doesn't deserve it." Maxwell's mind wandered back to the previous evening when he'd finally decoded the last part of Emily's message. The boathouse photo Pete had given him showed a particular detail he'd almost missed. A small painting visible through the window, hanging on the wall. After hours of research, he'd identified it. A minor Van Gogh, stolen from a Dutch museum in 1945. The same painting that had been listed in one of Thomas Morrison's last account audits before Emily's disappearance. At 11:15, a black Lincoln Continental pulled up to the warehouse. 2 men in expensive suits stepped out, opening the trunk to remove several briefcases. Maxwell recognized one of them as Marcus D'Angelo from Frank's surveillance photos. 11:30 a.m. Pete's delivery van turned onto the pier right on time. Maxwell watched through his binoculars as the diner owner, wearing his usual grease-stained apron, carried boxes of what appeared to be lunch orders toward the warehouse entrance. Just like every Tuesday, Pete had told him, they order the same thing, burgers and fries for the whole crew. Been doing it for months. But today's delivery was special. Hidden among the food containers was a small package that would create enough confusion to give Maxwell his chance. 11:45 a.m. A guard emerged from the warehouse, smoking a cigarette. Through his binoculars, Maxwell could see Pete leaving, his empty delivery boxes under his arm. Everything was set. At precisely noon, Maxwell heard it, the warehouse's fire alarm, triggered by the small smoke device Pete had planted. Men began pouring out of the building, looking confused and annoyed. In the chaos, Maxwell made his move. The back entrance was exactly where Emily's clues had indicated. 3 quick cuts with the wire cutters, and he was inside. The layout matched the crude map she'd managed to slip to Pete. Storage rooms on the left, offices on the right. Maxwell moved silently through the dim corridors, hearing distant shouts as the guards dealt with the false alarm. Third door on the right, locked. He pulled out the small set of picks he hadn't used since his army days, praying his skills weren't too rusty. The lock clicked open, and there she was. Emily sat on a small cot, her face lighting up with recognition as he entered. "You decoded everything," she whispered. "The fireflies were a nice touch," he replied, moving quickly to her side. "Can you walk?" She nodded, standing up. "But Max, there's something you need to see first. Something I've been waiting 17 years to show someone I could trust." Emily moved to the corner of the room, pulling away a loose panel in the wall. Behind it was a small leather portfolio. "I took these the day I disappeared. Photographs of paintings, documents, shipping manifests. Proof of everything Calabrese stole. That's why you ran, to protect these documents." "To protect my family," she corrected. "Calabrese threatened to kill them if I ever came forward. But now," a noise in the hallway cut her off. Footsteps approaching. "Time to go," Maxwell said, grabbing her hand. "Back exit." Through the storage room. "There's a window that leads to the water. I've been watching it for 3 days." They moved quickly through the warehouse, Emily clutching the portfolio to her chest. Behind them, voices echoed off the concrete walls. Someone had discovered her empty room. The storage room window was high but manageable. Maxwell gave Emily a boost, then pulled himself up after her. They emerged onto a narrow ledge 15 feet above the harbor's dark water. "Hope you still remember how to swim," Emily said with a ghost of a smile. Shouts erupted from inside the warehouse. A guard appeared at the window, reaching for his weapon. Maxwell grabbed Emily's hand. "Together!" She squeezed his hand, and they jumped. The cold water hit them like a shock, but they surfaced quickly. Emily had already spotted their escape route. A small maintenance boat tied up 50 yards away, its owner conveniently at lunch. As they swam, gunshots rang out, bullets splashing into the water around them. But the guard's position at the high window made accuracy nearly impossible. They reached the boat just as its owner returned, a sandwich halfway to his mouth. The man took one look at Maxwell's expression and wisely stepped aside. "Sorry about this," Maxwell said, helping Emily aboard. "The police will ensure you're compensated for any inconvenience." The boat's engine roared to life, and they sped away from Pier 17, leaving chaos in their wake. Emily hugged the portfolio to her chest, protecting it from the spray. "Where to?" Maxwell asked, steering toward open water. "The Federal Building," Emily replied. "It's time to end this. But first..." She opened the portfolio, pulling out a photograph that made Maxwell's breath catch. It wasn't just proof of stolen artwork. It was proof of something much bigger, something that would shake Boston's powerful elite to their core. And finally, after 17 years, Emily Morrison was ready to tell the whole story. Behind them, sirens began to wail as police boats responded to reports of gunfire at the pier. The game wasn't over yet, but for the first time since that summer day in 1968, Emily allowed herself to feel something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. The small boat cut through Boston Harbor's choppy waters, salt spray coating their faces. Emily held the portfolio close, her knuckles white with tension. Maxwell kept glancing behind them, but no pursuit boats had appeared. Yet, "Before we go to the Federal Building," Emily said, raising her voice over the engine's roar, "there's something you need to see." She opened the portfolio with trembling hands. They'd moored in a quiet cove, hidden from the main harbor traffic. The morning sun cast long shadows across the boat's deck as Emily spread out the contents of her leather case. "That summer at Lake Michigan," she began, "I was supposed to be swimming, but I'd forgotten my book in Dad's car. When I went to get it, I saw him arguing with Calabrese and his men behind the boathouse. They were looking at paintings, old masters, priceless works that had vanished during the war." She pulled out a stack of photographs, taken with what must have been a child's camera. The images were grainy but clear enough, men in summer suits examining paintings, arguing over documents. "My father had no idea what he'd gotten involved in," Emily continued. "He thought he was just managing legitimate accounts. But that day, Calabrese was angry. Said Dad had been asking too many questions about certain transactions. I heard them threatening him, his family." her voice caught. "They saw me taking pictures. I ran, but D'Angelo caught me." Maxwell's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "Calabrese gave me a choice," Emily said, her voice bitter. "Disappear completely. Let everyone think I was dead, or watch my family die. I was 14, terrified. I chose to run." "But how did you survive?" A sad smile crossed her face. "Mrs. Henderson, my old piano teacher. She found me hiding in her garage that night, figured out I was in trouble. She helped me get to her sister in Minnesota, gave me a new name. Sarah was her mother's name." Emily pulled out one final document, a ledger page covered in Thomas Morrison's neat handwriting. "This is what my father found. Proof that Calabrese wasn't just stealing art. The paintings were payment, from former Nazi officers who needed new identities after the war. My father had unknowingly stumbled onto a decades-old network that helped war criminals escape to South America." Maxwell studied the ledger, his mind racing. "This is why they've never stopped looking for you. This could expose not just Calabrese, but dozens of powerful people. People who built fortunes on blood money." Emily nodded. "I've spent 17 years gathering more evidence, tracking connections. Every time I settled somewhere, started feeling safe, they'd find me. But I couldn't just turn this in, not without proof that I was telling the truth about why I ran. Without that, I'd look like a criminal myself, running from the law all these years. And now I have you," she said softly. "A respected businessman who knew me before, who can testify that I wasn't some troubled teen running away from home. Someone who can help prove that my disappearance wasn't an accident." Maxwell remembered something. "The ledger. That's why you arranged everything around the 17th, isn't it? The same date as the ledger entry your father found." Emily's eyes widened. "You really did decode everything." "I never forgot our codes," he said quietly. "Never forgot you." A police siren wailed in the distance, breaking the moment. Emily quickly gathered the documents. "We need to move," Maxwell said, starting the boat's engine. "Frank Whitaker, my investigator, is meeting us at the federal building with U.S. marshals he trusts. No local police." As they pulled away from the cove, Emily suddenly grabbed Maxwell's arm. "Wait, there's one more place we need to go first. That last photo Pete gave you, of the boathouse. It wasn't just about the painting in the window. The boathouse itself. What about it? My father had a hidden safe there. The combination was my birthday. That's why I made sure you remembered that photo. Everything he discovered, all his original evidence, it's still there. Has to be. Calabrese's men never found it." Maxwell checked his watch. It was a 2-hour drive to Lake Michigan. Going there first would be risky. Calabrese's men would be searching everywhere. But Emily's father's evidence could be crucial in corroborating her story. "The lake house was abandoned years ago," Emily added. "No one's maintained the property. But the boathouse was built on stone foundations. It should still be standing." Maxwell studied her face, the face he'd dreamed about for 17 years. She'd spent her entire adult life protecting this truth, sacrificing everything to keep her family safe. He couldn't let her down now. "Then that's where we're going," he said, turning the boat toward the marina where he'd parked his car. "But first, we need to make a call." At a payphone on the dock, Maxwell contacted Frank Whitaker. "Change of plans. Meet us at Lake Michigan. And Frank, bring everything we discussed, all of it." Emily raised an eyebrow as he hung up. "What did you discuss?" "Insurance," Maxwell replied grimly. "Because Calabrese isn't going to let us reach that boathouse without a fight." The morning sun climbed higher as they drove west, leaving Boston behind. In the passenger seat, Emily dozed fitfully, 17 years of running showing in the dark circles under her eyes. Maxwell kept checking the rearview mirror, watching for any signs of pursuit. They were racing against time, against Calabrese's network, against the shadows of the past itself, and somewhere ahead, an old boathouse held secrets that could change everything, if they could reach it in time. The highway stretched before them like a promise, and Maxwell Sterling found himself making another vow. This time, he wouldn't let Emily Morrison disappear again. This time, they would face whatever came together. In his jacket pocket, the small velvet box he'd carried for 2 weeks seemed to grow heavier, but that would have to wait. First, They had a 17-year-old mystery to solve and a very dangerous man to stop. The old lake house loomed before them, weathered by years of neglect. Late afternoon sunlight filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the overgrown lawn. Maxwell parked his car behind a stand of pines, out of sight from the main road. "It's exactly the same," Emily whispered, staring at the boathouse by the water's edge. "Even the old tire swing." "We should wait for Frank," Maxwell said, but Emily was already opening her door. "No time. Look." She pointed to fresh tire tracks in the gravel drive. "Someone's already here." They moved quietly through the tall grass, staying close to the tree line. The boathouse stood on stone pillars over the water, its wooden walls grey with age. A black sedan was parked behind it. "D'Angelo," Maxwell muttered, "must have guessed where we'd go." "There's another way in," Emily said. "Under the deck. We used to sneak in that way as kids, remember?" Maxwell remembered. They'd spent countless summer afternoons in the boathouse, reading comics and sharing secrets. Now, those childhood memories felt like scenes from another life. They crept closer, hearing voices from inside. 2 men, maybe 3. Emily led them to a loose board under the deck, hidden by old fishing nets. "Ladies first," she whispered with a ghost of her old smile. They crawled through the narrow space, emerging behind stacked crates in the boathouse's main room. Through gaps in the boxes, Maxwell could see Marcus D'Angelo and 2 others, searching systematically through the building. "It has to be here somewhere," D'Angelo was saying. "The old man wouldn't have kept that evidence at the bank. Too risky." Emily touched Maxwell's arm, pointing to a section of wall behind an old cabinet. The safe. But to reach it, they'd have to cross open floor. Suddenly, gravel crunched outside. New voices approached. "Check the perimeter," a familiar voice ordered. Vincent Calabresi himself had arrived. Maxwell's heart raced. They were trapped between D'Angelo's men inside and Calabresi's approaching forces. Emily squeezed his hand, her eyes wide with fear. Then, faintly, a bird call echoed across the lake. A whippoorwill, exactly like the ones Frank Whitaker had been imitating during their planning sessions. "Now," Maxwell whispered. He stood suddenly, knocking over a stack of crates. As D'Angelo's men spun around, smoke bombs crashed through the boathouse windows, filling the room with thick grey clouds. In the chaos that followed, Maxwell and Emily moved with purpose. She went straight for the wall safe while he engaged the nearest guard. His army training came back in a rush. Disable, don't kill. The smoke gave them the advantage they needed. Outside, gunshots rang out as Frank's team engaged Calabresi's men. The sound of police sirens wailed in the distance. Emily's fingers flew over the safe dial, 07-22-54. Her birthday. The door swung open. "Got it!" she cried, pulling out a thick manila envelope. A figure loomed through the smoke. D'Angelo, gun raised. "That's far enough," he snarled. But he'd forgotten about the loose board in the floor, the one that had always squeaked. Maxwell hadn't. As D'Angelo stepped forward, the board shifted. That moment of imbalance was all Maxwell needed. The gun went flying. D'Angelo went down. And through the clearing smoke, they saw Vincent Calabresi himself in the doorway, looking older but no less dangerous than he had 17 years ago. "Emily Morrison," he said softly. "The one loose end I could never quite tie up." "It's over, Calabresi," she replied, her voice steady. "The evidence is going to the FBI, all of it. The art smuggling, the war criminals, everything." Calabresi smiled, reaching into his jacket, but before he could draw his weapon, new figures appeared behind him, U.S. Marshals, led by Frank Whitaker. "Vincent Calabresi," Frank announced. "You're under arrest for conspiracy, trafficking in stolen goods, and about 17 years' worth of other charges." As the marshals led Calabresi and his men away, Emily sank to the floor, clutching her father's envelope. Tears streamed down her face. 17 years, she whispered. "I was starting to think this day would never come." Maxwell knelt beside her, taking her hand. "Your father would be proud. You protected his evidence all this time." "I just wish," she paused, wiping her eyes, "I wish I could have told my parents I was alive. that I didn't just abandon them. About that, Maxwell said softly. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small book. Your mother's still alive, Em, living in Florida. I found her 3 days ago. Emily's hands trembled as she took the address book. She's alive? But how? Why didn't you tell me? Because I knew you'd want to go to her right away, and we needed to end this first, to make it safe. He hesitated, then pulled out the velvet box he'd been carrying. I also wanted to ask you something first. Emily's eyes widened as he opened the box. Inside wasn't a ring, but a small golden key. The oak tree, he said quietly. Our oak tree. I bought your old house years ago, but I never lived there. Been waiting for the right person to share it with. Maxwell Sterling, Emily whispered. Are you asking me to come home? He took her hand, his heart pounding just like it had when they were 14. I'm asking for a lot more than that, Emily Morrison. I'm asking for a chance to make up for 17 years of lost time, to build a life together, to... She didn't let him finish. Her kiss was soft, tender, carrying all the weight of their shared past and the promise of their future. When they finally parted, Emily was smiling through her tears. The answer is yes, to all of it. Later that evening, as the sun set over Lake Michigan, they stood on the shore where Emily had disappeared so long ago. But this time, she wasn't alone. This time, she was heading home. Look, she said, pointing to the gathering dusk. Small lights danced over the water. Fireflies, just like the ones that had helped lead them back to each other. Maxwell squeezed her hand, and together they watched the tiny lights flicker against the darkening sky. Each flash a reminder that some loves are worth waiting for, some truths worth protecting, and some stories worth telling, even if they take 17 years to find their ending. Thank you for watching today's story. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel to relive the magic of the 80s every day with our heartfelt stories. May God bless you and your family, and don't forget to click on the video popping up on the screen right now. It's another totally rad story you won't want to miss. See you in the next video, and stay awesome.